to. But we don't ship it in the tarball or anything like that. So that's my thought on that. So we don't necessarily have to include a dry run. Or if we include the dry run, it's not operating on local files.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think there are definitely a few different possible paths there. I don't know which one makes sense yet. But certainly we can't ignore that use case. I mean, one option that I was mulling over is whether we should just have static YAML for the baseline install, because now that we've, if we go down the path of kind of making configuration a separate step, there really are far fewer permutations of that baseline install. Like it's basically just a matter of adding any of these optional flags to the deployment. So we could just ship static YAML for the baseline install and say, take these if you want them, or just use them to do the baseline install and then have commands for the configuration stuff. Anyway, I don't want to rabbit hole too much down this. I just definitely wanted to highlight that we need to be considering this use case. We can't ignore it as we go through.
Okay. All right. So I would definitely welcome any heads up for pitfalls, because this is a drastic departure from the way the CLI is structured right now. If this is possible, I think it's going to be really very intuitive for the users. So I personally am liking the way this is coming out. So I we do have client commands and server commands mixed up, and like we have to address the issues we were just talking about. But I haven't really seen any downside of doing it this way. So I wanted to get the. Did any of you have any question was that something you didn't understand from what I put on the document? I guess we'll start there.
I guess the one thing I would ask is to have a timeline spelled out for deprecation. As we move things around, I think even acknowledging the downfalls of the install command, I know folks are using it in scripts and stuff, and I don't want to see it like break immediately as we move things. So I'd like to give at least one release where we support both. Even I know it's going to be messy, yeah. But so some indication in there to say this is the plan for how long we straddle, and then this is when it would switch.
Yeah, I think one thing that we could do is we could add these commands before our next main version. And on the main version, we stop supporting Velero install whenever that happens to be.
Yep, I would agree with that. And then, yeah, they're there. Install continues to do what it does, but it has deprecation warnings.
Yes, that will give people time to shift to this way of doing things. Even with the whatever version this comes out for. So I guess it's pretty straightforward. So the init command, I might have missed other commands that would have to go under init, but the idea is that just do the minimum necessary to get Velero booted up, and then maybe the Velero sets. And I wouldn't be against combining these two things, but I think I personally like this way. There would just be additional optional flags that people can tweak. Things that, for example, gets configured with the default value, but people could go here, Velero set, and see what options are that they can tweak. And obviously the Velero config is all about locations. One thing that I sort of got creative with was the set default location. So if we do a Velero help, we will have, no, sorry. If we do a Velero install help, that will be, there are three flags there that we need to fulfill for that default location to get created. And it's the bucket, the prefix, the plugin name, which now we call provider. And they're sort of like dangling in the middle amongst all the other flags. And it's sort of hard to map that those things map to, oh, the reason that they exist there is to map to, is so that the default location can get created, which is some, and that even is optional. You might not want to have that created. You might create it on your own. So I think what I was thinking was just trying to make that very as explicit as possible. And then, so I got creative with this flag here. So that I don't have my hard sets, but I was just thinking, how can we make it so one command would take care of that? And so instead of having, we could make the values like positional, like the first value is the bucket and the second is the prefix, or we can just make it require that the key has a specific name, but mainly there will be an indication that these are the values that are required to get a default location going, and you don't need to create a full location from scratch, because we'll take care of that for you. But if there is a plugin that will map to the plugin name here. And this is something that would definitely rely on documentation more so than the other flags that are more self-explanatory. But the nice thing about this is that one flag, boom, takes care of everything. And also the true or false for the snapshot location could go here too. I think it might be a little hard to understand. I like it that it's concise. Just one flag takes care of that.
Yeah, I think by making that by making the snapshot location true false, you then make everything in there true. You then make everything optional, because bucket prefix aren't applicable to snapshot location. Like I like the idea of having a, like, just give me the default a command that just does that. I'm just not sure on the semantics for making it span both snapshot location and backup location. I would have to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, like by way of contrast, currently we have Velero backup location create as a command, and then it has a bucket flag, which is a required flag because that's a required field for a backup location. So that's kind of a strongly typed CLI command, so to speak.
Yeah, but in that case, go ahead.
And then separately, there's a Velero snapshot location create command, which requires any fields that are specifically required for snapshot locations.
Yeah, but in those cases, you are deliberately creating a location, and here we don't know if the user is going to want default location during using through a config. They can still go and create a location with the other flag up here, get backup. No, what is it? Backup location. This can manage to create backup location.
Could we use that and add a I'm wondering if we could add a flag to that to say this is the default one.
Sorry, are you saying
to the backup location?
Oh, there is a flag that sets, is this one, use backup location, sets the default backup. We already have this flag, it's called default backup storage location. I just renamed it to use backup location. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, well, I think isn't that on Velero server?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. So I was thinking for Velero config, that we would say when I'm creating this location, I give it the bucket. I'm doing all this creation, and then if I pass the default, the -- default flag, it then goes updates the deployment and adds the use.
Yeah, I like that.
And so that way it's clear that one, it's a backup location instead of a snapshot location, and two, it does the default switching for you, because I think if we just have the so it would be similar to this, and where all the like Steve was saying, all these things could be strongly typed and required, but we could make it default and do the server update, because I think the command that does both snapshot and backup locations, it just gets hard to balance the required field between both of them.
Okay, so I think we are, what you were bringing up is actually two things. What you said about having that make defaults flag when we are creating, I was actually checking if we didn't have that, because that's a great idea. We should definitely, we don't have that. So we should have that. So we are creating a patch, but then there are a bunch of configurations that we also have to import. Now this is, so I'm gonna add that to the notes later. So this is trying to address the intention of making the initial setup as quick as possible. And that's why we have, like with the install now, we have the ability to like set a default location for them automatically, as long as they pass those 2 or 3 informations with the bucket name, prefix, and the plugin name. So if we get that, we can create the default location for them. So this is what this is trying to address. Now I could also, we could do away with doing this and just require, so few things we can do. Remove this completely and require them to explicitly set a location from scratch instead of trying to give them a hint. We can keep this here and just like this, but I don't think this is workable. Or we could keep this here, just the one set default backup location and do nothing, or set a separate flag to get the input to find out if the user wants to set up a default snapshot location or not.
Yeah, I think the Velero server also assumes if there's only one backup storage location, that's the default.
True. However, if we delete, I don't know the answer to that actually, because let's say we have two backup locations. One location A is the default. If we delete that, I am assuming that the other location will become default automatically without the user doing anything.
Right. And new backups will go there. Old backups should have the old one written, but then they'll they can't get to it because it's deleted.
Yeah. But they can always recreate it.
Right.
So any preference? I think I like keeping this because it's sort of, we already have it and it might be handy for people who don't, we wouldn't have to require them to know more commands, more flags to set up a patch. With just these three things, we can create it automatically. But we could remove the snapshot location through false and put that into a different flag, a different, different flag.
So I'm maybe not following part of this, but so is this a separate command from the one that, like, is there also a command for just creating a location that's not the default?
Yes. Yes. So this here, backup location, this creates the backup location. This is just like the Velero backup storage location creates. It would be this here, which we could rename to create backup location.
So both of those create a backup location, but the set default location also marks it as default.
So, right, so what this command would be.
Which command?
Is, sorry.
Just to make sure I'm following.
Location.
Yep.
Yeah. This backup location flag is essential, is this flag here. I mean, this command. That could be a command too. We'll figure that out later. But the intention is that that flag / commands is exactly the same as this. Velero backup location creates.
Okay.
And this one doesn't have a flag to make this one a default location. Mm-hmm. But that's something I think we should add.
Yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, you know, if we just added a flag to that command, then do we need a second command? Like if we add a flag to the first one to allow the user to specify this should be the default location, mm-hmm. Does that cover, it seems like that covers the functionality of that second command, right?
Let me see here. I'm trying to see all of the things that are not optional. Nothing here says optional.
Yeah, I'm guessing the documentation here doesn't fully capture what's required versus optional, but I would think provider and bucket are probably required and everything else is probably optional.
Yeah, the only thing I see that says optional is a backup sync period.
So I don't remember, to backup location via this command here, are the only required things the provider name, which is the plugin name, the bucket, and the prefix?
Prefix isn't necessary because you may store at the root of the bucket. And for Azure, I think config is necessary.
Yeah, so I mean, I just tried it out. The two required flags are provider and bucket for that command.
All right, so in that case, I don't see a value having this.
So basically we'd add a flag, an option to the existing command, or, you know, if we rearrange it to allow the user to specify whether or not that should become the default.
Yes.
And then probably update the documentation, like the CLI documentation, to actually indicate what's required versus optional without having to run it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
However, with that said, I still think it would be nice to have this flag, which is a flag that would allow you to switch make the default, switch the default location from one to another.
From the client side, you mean, without having to go edit the deployment?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think that's reasonable.
I think this is pretty handy. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing that I actually go ahead.
You go ahead, Ellen.
All I was going to say was I think the Velero server flag is fine. The flag that does it is fine, and all I think the client side one should do is go to the deployment, edit it. If it's already there, change the line, put the name in, and if it's not there, add it. But I don't think we should really need to change the server one. So that's all I was gonna say.
Yeah, I agree. I would say, we can keep in mind that it's an option to change how the back end for that works. I mean, if we want to move it to be a field or an annotation on the backup locations themselves, I think we could consider doing that. There are a couple of different issues to think through, but they're solvable problems. It may be nice to move to that, because then this command doesn't have to go modify the Velero deployment. It's just touching backup storage locations, which I think has some value just in terms of simplicity and kind of like clarity of what each command is doing. But we can just keep that in mind, and I don't know yet if it really makes sense to do or not.
Okay, so we'll scratch this. Does it make sense to keep, I think the answer to this is going to be yes, to keep a flag to indicate if there should be a default snapshot location or not? While you think about it, let me ask you a different question, because I just realized I don't understand how this works. So all right. So for defaults, the default backup storage location for me is trivial. I super understand that. But I'm not seeing how it maps to the volume snapshots, only because there are multiple of them. What are we really saying to the user when we say make snapshots location A, B, and C the default ones?
So the idea here is that there's a default per provider. So if you're using EBS volumes and also Portworx volumes in your cluster, you can potentially have multiple volume snapshot locations for each of those. So you could have 2 EBS locations and 2 Portworx locations. And so the user should be able to say, to specify a default location for EBS and a separate default location for Portworx that says, when I back up an EBS volume, the snapshot should go to this location, and when I back up a Portworx volume, it should go to this location.
Okay.
So it's on a per provider basis.
So there is a restriction that there will be only one backup per provider?
The snapshots can only go to one place per provider per backup, yeah.
I meant to say location. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that was in preparation for replication. So we can write it to one availability zone, and then later we can have some replication logic that moves them around. But for now, yeah, we usually it's copying it into the availability zone you're in with your compute nodes. and then later on down the road, if we ever get to replication, we would copy it out, somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And in
so back to the
yeah. So for your question about turning a default on or off, is this related to the --use volume snapshots flag? So this one, I think, was if memory serves, this was mostly for Restic users who were using Restic and not volume snapshots at all. So they were only getting file level snapshots and not using EBS or GCP, or they were on some provider that didn't have a Velero plugin, so they could just turn that functionality off and not even worry about it.
Yeah, so I think that's probably not relevant going forward, because it's, if you want to set up a volume snapshot location, you'll do that. And if you don't, nothing's going to create one automatically for you.
Okay, perfect. So that helps that. We'll deprecate this. I will just remove this completely. Excellent. So plugin, this is straightforward. So Steve actually had a comment to add the secrets and the variable flags that settles up here, and that makes total sense.
Yeah, because the process of adding a plugin, you add in a init container, and then you potentially create a secret, and you potentially add an environment variable to the Velero deployment. You might also add service account annotations or pod annotations, depending on the method of authentication you're using. But all of that stuff happens to the Velero deployment or the Restic daemon set. So I figured, the command for adding plugins should probably capture all of those things, and we'll just need to figure out exactly how.
And plugin dir here, would that edit the deployment as well?
Yeah, this is currently on the server.
So would we remove it from the server? I think it has to stay, doesn't it?
So my preference is everything that we are, let's say we end up shifting comments from the Velero server into this structure. Anything that gets shifted here, I would not, even if we keep the commands so we can use it, I wouldn't display it to the user. I would prefer not to have two commands, have one command in two different places, just to make it less possibility for confusion.
Well,
that's my proposal.
Yeah, well, I think the server needs to know where to look to load the plugins is I think what I was getting at. So the server needs to know when it's starting up where to read. When the init containers are all mounted, it needs to know where those binaries are. So I think it needs to have that flag still. So that's like a communication point between this configuration and the server.
But can this not be set at a later point before adding the plugin, but after init?
I mean, if you change that to something other than the default, then you need to go change your init containers Docker file to have it copy its plugin binary to a different location, and change the Velero deployment to have a different empty dir volume or mount it into a different location. I'm not sure that's something we need to expose as a config option. That's really mainly a development tool, development config option.
All right, so we'll leave it on where it is today, and I'll remove it from here.
Yeah, because there's Velero server plugin, and I think we want to leave that one alone. Because that's how the server itself loads plugins that it uses to act on, like restore item actions and backup item actions and things like that. That's not user facing. That's all like internal. That's what we do when we're doing restore and backup and things like that.
I'm sorry, which one did you say? Because I only see plugin there.
Actually, I think it's actually hidden. So if you run a Velero server plugin, I think Steve set there's a flag in there from Cobra that you can say it's hidden. So if you actually run it directly, it'll complain.
Oh.
Or is Velero?
Okay. I think I remember. Okay, so we'll just leave that alone.
Velero plugin serve, I think is what it is. Well, I don't know. I know what you're talking about, and yeah, it's an internal server thing that we shouldn't really be changing.
But yeah, I think that one and Velero server space dash plugin dir, I think we can leave alone, just because that's a developer thing, not really a user thing.
Okay. Now, when we were talking about environment variables and secrets, should these two flags here be moved to under plugin?
I think so, yeah. No, I mean, they're plugin level things.
Yeah, I think it
makes
sense.
I think that makes sense. I know Dylan Murray from Red Hat has mentioned he thinks those should go under backup storage location, which I think that's a worthwhile conversation. I don't know if I completely agree, but I'm willing to hear him out on it. But I think plugin is a place to start. I mean, that's probably less change to our architecture than his proposal.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I wasn't. Now that you pointed that out, it makes sense to be with the plugin because it's necessary for that plugin to run. The backup location is an abstract, is a concept where we're just saying, okay, this is a connector between where you like your backup and the actual connector here. So this is just this handle saying, okay, you can connect here, you can connect there. So the secret in my mind definitely goes together with the plugin.
Yep, I would agree with that. His argument was that putting it all in the backup storage location condenses all of the information that you need to get to it in the backup storage location. But I can see like putting it all with the plugin condenses all the information you need with the plugin. But
it's where you draw the line.
Yeah. I would say more of it needs to be with the plugin than it needs to be with the BSL. And you need the deployment you need the information in the Velero deployment anyway, because the Velero deployment has to get to stuff that those processes need to get there. So I would lean towards starting with putting it with the plugins because that's where they're at now.
Yeah, the plugin just depends on that too heavily for it not to go together.
Right, and we'd have to redesign a bunch of stuff to move all that to the BSLs and yeah, I would rather start here than move it all to locations. So yeah,
and I would also throw out the environment variables here. So currently we basically put an environment variable for all of our providers on base Velero deployment. So Helm has an AWS, Envar, a GCP one, and Azure one. And it would be really nice to remove that and basically as part of Velero plugin actually, specify, hey, and I need to add this environment variable with this value. That way we wouldn't have to have them hard coded in Velero itself.
Mm-hmm. So that would go together, like if I am doing a Velero plugin add So the add is adding an image. Should we have a different flag to add the environment variable or variables that go with that image? Or would it be like a high level thing? We adding any environment level that will go with any plugin. You know what I mean? Or what?
Yeah, I'm not sure off the
Would we
top
do
of my
something
head
that
if
will be on a?
I'm not sure that I have a strong opinion yet on whether it should be, like a single command or multiple ones, but as far as like getting a plugin to be functional, it's adding the init container, it's creating and mounting the secret, and it's setting that environment variable. So I think, we need all three of those things, plus some of this annotation stuff. And it should all fall under Velero plugin.
Could we have a config map where we have contains all the environment variables for each provider or plugin that we can then fetch from and configure things?
Yeah, that could be an option. So set up basically have the user create a config map with those things and mount that in along with the secret.
I mean, I think we can have a command, just like kube control sets the config file. We say, okay, set the environment variable, or whatever name we give it. And then things will be added, entries will be added and removed according to the plugin you're trying to add. Something like that work?
Potentially, yeah. I'd have to think about it a little bit more, but it's definitely an option.
So what you were talking about as far as annotations, Steve, are these new flags that we're going to need, or is it from any of the, like, for example, pod annotations?
Yeah, so and we'll need to look at it a little bit. I mean, the reason we have that pod annotations flag is basically to support the use case of users who are using kube to IAM, which requires that you set certain annotations on the pod telling it what IAM account or what IAM role to use. But there's really, again, a plugin level configuration thing. And the other one is the service account annotations, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I forget exactly. I think the two plugins that take advantage of it at the moment are AWS and GCP, and I forget which. I don't think both use service account annotations, but
no, I think service account annotations is for GKE workload identity.
Yeah, but definitely for AWS, you can get around having to give them a secret file, but what you have to do is put annotations on the Velero pod, the Rustic pods, and any other pods you want to have access to those resources. So it has to go on all, and it, like Steve said, it really is required by the pods. I'm sorry, by the plugins, but it becomes like a Velero pod level thing. Like it goes on the Velero and Rustic pods, but really the requirement is from the plugin.
Okay, so this obviously needs to go on the plugin, this flag SA annotations.
Yeah, I don't think that's required for initialization.
Right, and this is just for GKE, you're saying?
Right now it is, yes.
All right, so I'll move this to under plugins, and then we'll see what else needs to be done or changed for annotations. Now, this makes me think that right now, the only thing here that I see that needs to be set for initialization is image. Am I missing something else?
Image isn't even required. I mean, if you're using an official release binary of Velero, it'll automatically use the appropriate version tag. So I was going to say when you went through the section before that, personally, I think init and set can be combined.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking that now.
I
just realized that this is optional. I forgot.
Since we're clearing so many of these other flags out of, the install command, I think the set that will actually remain here is relatively small. I think they're probably all optional. And so I think one command is probably okay.
Yeah. Should we call it init?
I think I'm fine with that. I think changing the name makes sense given that the functionality is changing. I think that makes a clear signal that it's not doing the same thing. I think some behavior will have to change because I think what's going to happen if we changed it today and it just put the image on, it's going to sit there and complain that it can't connect to it's going to complain that there's no plugins.
Oh yeah, that behavior is going to have to change.
But in terms of just putting it on there, I think this meets the criteria because we now have default limits and requests for the CPU and memory, so people can tweak that if they need to. And yeah, the rest that it puts the namespace, it puts the, I guess that would be the one thing if they wanted to put it into a different namespace. I think that's the only thing that I would throw on there.
I'm sorry, say that again. What? I can watch this. I'm recording, so I can watch it again. But
so if they wanted to install Velero into a different namespace called something besides Velero, they might want to init into, I don't know, backup, the namespace backup. That might be an optional command on init, because I'm assuming init would handle putting the CRDs on the server, making a namespace, and then putting the deployment in the namespace.
Yeah.
So if they want to put it in a different namespace, it doesn't. I don't see that in this list of options at the moment. And we could just say we don't support that.
I have missed. We get questions for that sufficiently so that I would.
Is it?
I always have to look up the documentation to remember how that's done.
Yeah, and honestly, I may have left it out of here and just said, "Hey, if you want to change it, use Helm," because the intent for the install command was to make quick start easy, so I could have left it out.
It's under global flags. It's a global option. I'm fairly sure it works properly. It applies for basically any Velero command, so it shows up under global.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, so if you just do Velero, global flags namespace in which Velero should operate. Yeah, that flag's always kind of weird, because if you use it with like Velero backup create, it puts the backup in that namespace.
Right.
Which is sometimes confusing.
Do we want to maybe consider moving it to init?
Now that I'm talking through it, I'm not sure.
I mean, I think we want to support the functionality. Like Velero init should support doing the base install into any namespace. I'm pretty sure that as it is already, like we'll get that functionality by default, assuming we read the value of the flag in. It's just that since every Velero command like instantiates a Velero API client and namespace is part of that, this flag is global because it applies equally to every single Velero CLI command.
Yeah, I think you're right. It gets inherited through the Cobra command chain.
Yeah.
Not through objects, but yeah, the Cobra command chain's a little funky, but yeah.
It would be nice to, not have it just like blend into the list and the help text here. That's kind of the main issue with it.
Yeah.
This is one flag I will be okay duplicating and having it there because it works globally, obviously, and having it repeated under init. Because we do get a lot of questions about, oh, how do I make it work? Well, just add a value to that flag.
Yep. And I even forgot, but honestly, I'm not sure if you can duplicate it with the way Cobra works. I'd have to go reread, but I think Cobra will be like, oh, you already added it, or something like that.
Possibly.
But in terms of functionality, regardless of the implementation details, I think init should let you specify a different namespace to put the deployment in.
No, I think you definitely would because it's a global flag. Should work. It's just that it wouldn't be so self-documented if people are using the CLI to find out what's available. I mean, it's under the global flags. People should see, or maybe because maybe because init is going to have a much shorter list of flags. Maybe people won't miss that one.
Yep, that's very possible
to consider.
Yep.
Maybe we can clean up some of these global flags. I don't know.
Yeah, some of these I never use.
I was gonna look up how to change the namespace. I think now I will remember forever. We'll see. What else? Okay, so I think it's gonna work out nicely because then it's going to be install Velero, then Velero init, Velero config, Velero plugin, Velero restic, and create backup stuff. And then, so I have I think this flows really nicely in my head, at least. This part here, just how to document, how to use Velero. All right, I'm gonna change the window. Did you have a comment, Nolan?
The operator, I'm not sure an operator would be able to add plugins if they. Oh, then again, if you can use Velero, you have cluster permissions, so I guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm not very well versed on roles and their like the scope of roles.
Yeah,
so
that's
this
fair.
Might be fictitious, but it was just to give an idea. Like,
sure.
Yeah, it's very hand wavy. This is not official. Like, that's what people should do.
Yeah, I think in the overall like scheme of it makes sense that like the top 4 are the things you do, and then after that you can do create, restore, do the backups, do the schedules, and then you can restore. So I think that overall flow makes sense.
And maybe config locations based on what plugins there are.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, with the way the permissions break down, and I know we've gotten asked this before, and I think Cruz is working on some of this. People want to see more restricted permissions, and if we can get to that point, I think this breakdown will make more sense, and I would love to get there. But at the moment, I'm not sure if that line makes sense, just because Velero is is if you have access to like install a plugin, you're probably an administrator on the cluster.
True.
But overall, I like the recipe-based approach.
Yeah, it was more to illustrate, it's like, hey, this user only has 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. This other user has even less than that. I know we right now we can't constrain users that way. All right, so I have to watch this video again for the discussion at the beginning. To see what I have to do to address any GitOps concern.
Yeah, I think now that we've had a chance to kind of talk through all the flow, like I would suggest, you know, going through it and thinking about it from the perspective of a user who doesn't want to interactively be modifying stuff that's already deployed in the cluster, but who wants to generate a complete set of YAML that they can check into Git and apply at a later time. I think for Velero init, it's very clear that you can do that. If you do a, you know, dry run o YAML, you get your YAML and you can check it into Git. But for some of the later steps around plugins and config and stuff, it's still not clear to me how that will work for those users. So I would just suggest trying to think through that and think about what the options are there.
So the difficulty here is because the plugins wouldn't have default values, right? They'll have to enter.
Well, I think there are a few complexities. Like part of it is, you know, so like with Velero, essentially, how do you generate a Velero deployment YAML that includes all the plugin information that you need? So the init container and any secrets mounted and any annotations set. How do you get to that point through, you know, this new set of commands without actually applying it to the cluster?
Yeah.
And I feel like we may end up needing a separate path for those users. Like maybe it's just two parallel paths that aren't the same. But I don't know yet. I just want to make sure we continue to think about it and don't ignore those users.
Yeah, like I honestly think like this becomes I think it becomes at least three, I don't like saying it, but at least three distinct ways to do it. There's this way, there's Helm, and then there's Customize, where the plugins become like a layer on top of the base, so that what we're providing and generating in the plugin repos is not something that you kubectl apply -f, it's kubectl apply -k for customizing. And that would layer on top of your Velero deployment. I don't know exactly what that looks like. That's kind of spitballing, but I think despite the maintenance burden, that's probably the path of least resistance. Just because making these commands be able to operate on or operate against a kube API server and a local file seems like it's not worth the effort.
Yeah, my head was definitely going somewhere along the lines of the customized thing too. And I think we went away from that with Velero install for a reason, but now that we've separated plugins out to their own repos and we're talking about splitting up the workflows, like we don't have to maintain every permutation of like, here are all the different ways you can configure the Velero server, and then here are all the different ways you can install AWS. Like we don't need every possible combination of those materialized out as YAML. We just have like, here's the base stuff, here's the plugin stuff, you can mix and match it as you need it. And so I think the maintenance burden isn't as bad as it used to be. Certainly it'd be nice if we didn't have to support 3 different ways of installing things, but I think it's maybe a little bit more manageable than it was prior.
Yeah. Yeah. If we can recruit people to help maintain those or give us examples, like I'm way more open to having YAML examples. So especially if we go the customized route, having messed with that now, if we're doing the layering approach with customized, that YAML's way shorter. So applying the layer for a plugin, I think it's more or less, not exactly, but more or less a diff that you're applying on top for the files you're modifying. So I think it's a little bit less for our plugins to say, here's the change you're making to the base deployment to add the image. That's not as bad, and I still think we can work on some release tooling to make that more automatic for incrementing things and stuff like that. But yeah, I think we're going to end up, at least for the time being, we're going to end up with three distinct ways of doing this at least. And customized, so, I think, it's in the conversation because it's in kubectl. It basically is built in. So, yeah.
So, are we saying that we will ensure that the setup works with our CLI, obviously, and Helm, and Customize, but we are not concerned about being able to output YAML to use with kube control? Or did I get that wrong?
I think supporting Customize, Customize is inside of kube control. So if you use kubectl-k, that's using the Customize built into kube control.
All right.
So
once we get customized, if we get this structure in the way that it works for Customize, then it will work for kube control.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So I would count that as supporting kubectl. Yeah. kubectl. I'll just pronounce it all the ways.
I love it. Like you can have 5 people on the call, and there'll be.
I'll just make them all mad. Because yeah, unfortunately Helm was kind of crowned for a little bit, but now, like, because kubectl merged customized support in, that's now getting traction, and we don't want to completely isolate those folks by building our tools in such a way that we make it really hard to do dry run output.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. We talked about this. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I have. Anybody has any? Well, I was doing some Google searches, but if anybody has any operator they want to tell me about, because I haven't used the new operator. I can check out, I can get them installed and check how the CLI works.
Yeah, I looked at a few different things this morning. I mean, I looked at Contour, I looked at Istio, I looked at Cert Manager, maybe one other. Most of them provide raw YAML.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that.
I mean, and I think, yeah, like having the ability to get to raw YAML, I think is important. And that's kind of what the nature of my other comments were about. I think we can't totally get away from YAML. Istio has a CLI, Istio CTL, that has a install command that allows customization of things using like a -- set flag that's kind of similar to Helm. But Istio is also super complicated and probably way more complicated than Velero is. But anyway, it'd be, interesting reading if you want to look more at that. And then Cert Manager has a very similar flow to what we're talking about, as far as first you install the base and then you configure, in this case, issuers, which are essentially like backends for issuing certs. So they have the two-step, like first you install, but it's not yet usable until you then go configure an issuer. They're using raw YAML, I think, to do that stuff, but definitely interesting to see that they're using kind of a similar two-step install and configure process. So anyway, that's what I looked at this morning. I'll throw a few notes. I think it's helpful to try and draw inspiration from other tools where we can, and it helps make sure that we're not kind of a snowflake in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that, if either of you had encountered tools like that specifically to say, well, not Cert Manager specifically, but with that specific characteristic that there's a base system that's not really useful until you put some other backend on top of it. Because I think that's the property that makes our approach a little bit more complicated as compared. Like Contour needs Envoy, but that's, to my understanding, that's the one requirement. So once you get Envoy, you're fine. But if you could swap it out, that makes it a more interesting question. So I haven't done as much research as that. I'm curious to look at Helm 3 in terms of that's more client side at this point, but it's like adding the repositories. Because they've made that two-step now, so you have to add your repositories and then you can do your installs. So I need to look at that and think about that too.
All right. So I agree with your comment, Nolan. I think this makes sense. It's like the action and then whatever property for that action comes as a flag, unless Steve thinks differently.
No, I agree. And that's, from the beginning, like we asked at the very beginning of the project, we asked Joe Beta for help on this, and he, basically recommended that we go with kind of kube control patterns, which are very much like the command is the action and then flags are modifiers. So I think, and that's how things are structured now. I think it makes sense to try and stick to that pattern.
Yeah, I do like that Velero breaks from kubectl in that, for the most part, we can flip the noun and the verb, like Velero backup create or Velero create backup. That's one thing that drives me nuts about kube control, is I can't do kube control namespace get. I do kube control get namespace. So I would like to retain that just because it's a precedent we set in Velero, but other than that.
I like that too, because you have two verbs, two actions. You shouldn't have to be thinking, because it makes no sense which one should come first. They're just two random verbs. All right. And this, I'll highlight in a better way what would be removed from where. And any more comments? I really appreciate this. It was super useful, and we went way over time, so thanks. So any comments, questions?
I don't have anything else at the moment. I'm sure I'll think about this more, but this has been super useful.
Yeah, this was a really good session, and I'll definitely spend some time thinking about the kind of the GitOps stuff and the customized stuff that we talked about, and we should probably have a follow-up in a few days and just keep the discussion moving forward. But yeah, this was really productive.
I'm gonna rewatch the video too. I'm gonna stop recording now. I think so.